Hello, everybody. Uh, I'm going to give you an overview, and I'll go into a little more depth than that on a few topics of the broad general topic of what my proposal is to the world. And I invite you to join me in making this our proposal to the world. That, for starters, we start off by ensuring that we feed everyone using a planetary collective superintelligence in which we get a majority of humanity participating in one form or another. Um, I'll talk about kind of some of the origins of this and some big picture stuff, and then I'll get into some details as to how this could actually work, how there could be this coevolution between collective superintelligence and feeding everyone, right? And then other derivative benefits like the fact that we end pandemics through this process, and that it sets humanity on a course where now, with this exponentially growing collective superintelligence, we'll be able to finally cool the planet using planetary scale solar radiation management, or SRM. All right, so with that, I'm going to spend probably most of the rest of the video on screen share, though I'll pop back and forth. And I'll pause recording from time to time. And hopefully I won't keep you too long. I'll try to make this concise. So with that, I will screen share some slides I've prepared. So first of all, I will present two different pathways to get to a whole world. And just briefly, what do I mean by a whole world? In the lower right-hand corner, I have an image of it. It's basically a world that works for all people and for all species, ecosystems, and Mother Earth as a whole. And I talk about a direct pathway, one of the two pathways to get to a whole world. One I'm just going to call the direct, which is basically have the conversation which spans all of this, which includes evolving into an exponentially growing collective superintelligence, humanity evolving into a CSI for short, which will enable us to develop and continuously update the strategy and the plan. The strategy probably won't get updated too frequently, but the plan will be updated continuously as conditions change and evolve, all with a view to saving life on Earth. And I talk about saving, healing, and transforming life on Earth. We first must save the patient and then heal the patient. That's a longer process, and ultimately transform. So that's the direct pathway. So if that's the direct pathway, another pathway is indirect, which is to take kind of a detour from the holistic goal of solving all of the world's most daunting problems, including pandemics, exponential planetary overheating, the destruction of the biosphere, sixth mass extinction, the melting of the ice, the wildfires, just this house of horrors that we're now inhabiting. So instead of focusing on that as a whole, which is a really pretty big ball of wax to focus on all at once, the indirect pathway, what I'm calling the indirect pathway, does a detour and focuses just on feeding everyone, for starters, using collective intelligence, using essentially our present capabilities for organizing ourselves and applying our collective intelligence to a problem. Now, over time, as we address feeding everyone for multiple reasons, but we really don't need to dig very deep. But among them are included, notably, that by feeding everyone, we end pandemics, and more on that in other videos where we go deep into it. But in the process of doing this, we evolve from collective intelligence to collective superintelligence. And once we have collective superintelligence, now it starts to look more like the original direct pathway, right? From CSI to strategy and plan to whole world. But here we're talking about taking essentially this indirect path, focusing on feeding everyone and experiencing multiple derivative benefits from that, including ending pandemics and evolving collective superintelligence very, very quickly, because I believe this can be this issue of feeding everyone, this opportunity to feed everyone, will draw in people much more quickly than any other conversation, particularly with the impacts on pandemics, ending pandemics, eradicating pandemics, including all potential future pandemics. This is the key. Again, more on that in other videos. But basically, with CSI, we get a complete strategy and plan toward a whole world. And I call this this is one possible indirect pathway. There's multiple possible pathways. I argue that this is the most powerful one for a number of reasons. All right, let's delve into this particular pathway focused on feeding everyone. But first, let's take a little bit of a broad view of whole world. As I mentioned previously, wholeness for people and wholeness for the planet. And one strategy is to break this down into its component topics, and this is a process where you keep rooting down and keep rooting down. And the following is very conceptual. It's certainly not sufficiently detailed, but just to show where food lives relative to the others in a very general sense. And so with this indirect pathway, taking a major detour to focus just on feeding everyone, imagine that we fan out this taxonomy and cover all geographies and go into depth, and there would probably be millions easily of these what I would call leaf nodes topics, which are really all the different communities in the world, right? Hundreds of millions if you consider at the level of neighborhood and whatnot, and so, or at a minimum tens of millions. So here, think of all these as like essentially the geographical divisions in which people are congregated. Ultimately, to take it to an extreme, there would be 8 billion leaf node needs, one for each person. And that's becoming more and more a very real possibility to be able to tailor this to each individual. But that's going to an extreme. Let's dial it back and just come back to communities like cities and towns and rural areas, etc. Okay, that's on this kind of horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis would be topics that are general, that are not confined to a specific location, but apply all over the world, right? You know, this is just a sampling of, you know, some of the bigger ones. And so what's interesting then is if you essentially mash the two up and say, okay, for each specific geography, for each city, for each town, we need to deal with all these topics, right? And so you can envision a matrix spanning basically every intersection between a non-geography based general topic pertaining to feeding everyone and a specific geography. At each intersection, you could imagine there being literally a conversation. And when I say a conversation, I'm talking about some form of mashup between synchronous conversations via video conference, via Zoom, for example, versus asynchronous, like via Reddit, a Reddit thread. And, you know, both can coexist as well as myriad other forms. The point is that we have a network of conversations that spans all relevant topics applied to all geographies. And now, initially, we're going to probably start with a much coarser matrix, right? For example, you know, for each continent, we're going to have, you know, a working group talking about the application of all these different assets and tools and etc. to the problem and coming up with their own solutions. And then, you know, once that's kind of figured out at a very high level, then you go into more detail. Okay, that's fine. Well, right now, what level of detail are we at? We're actually at this super high level of detail where we're talking about for the whole world what exactly we need to do. So here we do have a number of different topics that we go into, but it's all happening within one single conversation, which is the Collective Intelligence Block Party and the Solution Club. So, you know, here we are. This is the current state of the conversation. It's one video conference room, not, you know, 10,000 or 10 million or whatever. But we're starting here with the faith that as we build, as more and more people join the conversation, including the big conversation that I showed initially, which spans the full stack from, you know, from collective intelligence, ending hunger, all the way through to a whole world in all of its detail. Anyway, so focusing on ending hunger, this is a community cafe, our first community cafe project that we did in Southern California, feeding an entire community for free. That once we imagine this like all over the world, that was our vision actually, was to put these all over the world. Now with the pandemic, it's essentially the same model, but delivered to your home. So it's community cafe on wheels, basically. And we believe that this is something that makes people feel so good. I mean, just look at the picture. Everyone's smiling. Even the guys who are trying to look tough are smiling. And there are actually some pretty tough folks there, but anyway, uh, this draws everyone in. It becomes a game, it becomes a challenge, it becomes a mission that everyone falls in love with. And so it becomes a virtuous cycle as the story grows, and as we see it as a way of bringing people together so that we end violence and end the very foundations of violence, which is suffering and deprivation. With the Hungerless Games, we get rid of all that. And once we've done that, then we can go on to many other things, solving many other problems and addressing other opportunities, like the opportunity to cool our planet through solar radiation management. That's a real biggie. I mean, that's where we need to get to very quickly after we've addressed making sure everyone has plenty to eat. All right, so getting back into the topic of feeding everyone, let's look at a couple of details. First of all, regarding government and governance, two different things, very overlapping. But governance, for example, includes community organization and, governance, communities basically governing themselves as regards food production and distribution. You see, food is going to become much more local, right? We've all heard stories going back into the 80s and 90s about, food miles and all that, and how food gets transported all over the place. Well, it's becoming much more local by necessity. And that requires a new level of governance. And in terms of local, when I was in Shanghai in 2006, 2007, while I was working for Microsoft, it was amazing that in this mega city of, I don't know, pushing 20 million people or whatever, where it's extremely, densely populated, everything's built out. Nonetheless, wherever there's like even, I don't know, a couple hundred square feet of empty space or soil or whatever, there you'll see like little greenhouses in the winter, and they'll be growing produce, and they do it so intensively that it's something on the order of like, I don't know, 30% or something like that, maybe even more, of the produce that is consumed in Shanghai is actually grown in Shanghai. So just amazing. And anyway, or at least that was the data point back in 2006, 2007. But I digress. My point is that we can produce so much food, even in a densely populated urban environment, through these different, vehicles. And, each of these fans out into many different subtopics. I mean, look at just, for example, windowsill gardens, right? There's so many specific subtopics related to safety, to viability, depending on the environment, to related to cold weather and freezing, and what do you need to do to mitigate that, what specific varieties to grow, and of course this all varies with climate and all different factors, direct sunlight, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course there's indoor hydroponics. I mean, there's just so many different topics to master in order for us to ensure that everyone is fed, even in the face of such challenging times that we're facing. And, that's really where collective superintelligence, not just collective intelligence, but collective superintelligence comes in, as so many people jump in to participate to join this movement, to come together to ensure that everyone has plenty to eat. Um, there's really nothing more urgent for us to do right now, because we simply cannot afford on any level letting people starve, and certainly not in any numbers. I mean, even if one person is starving, let's feed them. But you know tens of millions, hundreds of millions, this is ridiculous. And it could get much, much worse if we let it. um, so anyway, all I'm saying is, in the face of such obvious, urgent, wicked problems threatening our survival in the very near term, uh, there's no other game in town but coming together and solving our problems. And I'm arguing, hopefully convincingly, that this combination of ending hunger and going collectively super intelligent at the same time, right? Collective intelligence becomes sort of the starter motor for this process. And then it picks up steam as it becomes massively popular. That's the Hungerless Games virtuous cycle I was talking about earlier. And that draws in so many people that we really tap into this um, almost magical force of collective superintelligence, which I talk about in depth along with other colleagues in the 30-minute segment on uh, collective superintelligence, which I link to below. And there we talk about a lot of different scenarios, and it's kind of data and algorithm centric. On the more personal side, I recommend a separate video, which is 45 minutes long, which I also link to below in this, referring to this email. If you want to get all this full information, please sign up on radish.org. It's there's no cost. It's a gift we give to the world, and you'll be put on the email list. You can opt out anytime. And anyway, that's how to get up to date on everything. So in the email further below, I've got links to those videos and to some other stuff, and there's a fair amount of text there, including all the notes for this particular presentation, which is pretty extensive. It's like, I don't know, well over a dozen pages or something like that. Anyway, so back to the collective intelligence part of it. This is collective intelligence. This is collective superintelligence, particularly as we talk about in the 30-minute video. What happens is that while some people are specialized in very specific niche topic intersections, others are much more general and more broad, and including the leadership, which is emergent and totally decentralized, and holacracy, sociocracy. These are topics we can get into in terms of governance and all that, but it's basically just common sense, radical inclusivity and radical equality, and letting everyone have their opportunity to speak and share and contribute. And in this process, as we evolve to become very, very targeted to making sure everyone in every geography has ample nutrition, abundant, good nutrition through 100% plant-based, immune-boosting diets delivered to everyone's homes by the community itself. As we develop all this expertise and know-how and experience, folks from different areas will be able to help folks from other areas across, a common topic, like rooftop gardens, whether in the United States, Mexico, Canada, or Europe, there's certain things that you need to know about rooftop gardens, and there's certain best practices, and depending on the climate, there's all this knowledge about what works well. Anyway, I can go on and on. Let me just pause for a moment. All right. So earlier I was talking about solar radiation management, that we very quickly need to get to the place where we're rolling this out at massive scale. And in many ways, I see that as a much harder problem than ensuring that everyone has plenty to eat. Um, Not so much logistically or engineering wise, but more socially, culturally, politically. The bottom line is that humanity is having a really, really hard time collectively grappling with and taking responsibility for all the destruction we've caused, and the imperative to save life, heal life, and transform life on Earth, starting with transforming ourselves with great urgency. And also, you know, coming to terms with, the bigger picture and what we need to do, which is some heavy duty solar radiation management on the order of millions of square miles of reflectivity. We're talking about a very small percentage, but 2%, 3%. I don't know the exact figure. I don't know that anyone knows at this point. And that's part of the problem, is that no one on their own has the big picture. No individual, no organization, no group. We literally need collective intelligence in order to make sense of all this. And again, I refer to the 30-minute video that I linked to below for more on that. Um, and so the problems that we need to solve, or the solutions that we need to come up with for SRM, are really um, really varied, and many of which represent just totally new terrain for humanity. So something that would normally take us maybe years or decades to get comfortable with, we're going to need to get collectively comfortable with in a matter of months. And that simply requires collective superintelligence. There's no other way to get there. Um, and, you know, we keep, hiding from, distracting ourselves from, going around in endless circles of debate, pointless debate, and pretending that we don't have all the information that we need in order to really have sufficient understanding that we can actually take meaningful action. What do we always hear? Well, more study and research is recommended. We've been doing study and research pretty intensively on this for over half a century. What's it going to take? Uh, and the bottom line is that humanity is going to require some serious convincing in order to come to terms with the reality of the absolute urgency for planetary scale SRM. And basically, the three huge pills to swallow are: the magnitude of the problem is so great that we caused it, and third, that we can solve it. And that third one may be the biggest of all, because it implies a noblesse oblige. Because we can, we must solve it. And which then leads us to a fourth big pill to swallow, which is overcoming our fear of failure. As a species, we've developed quite an inferiority complex as we're becoming more and more aware of just how much destruction we've caused and how badly we've screwed up. And we are also screwed up in the head. We need to come to terms with that too, partly because of the addiction to money and ego and buying into this story of separation. So one of the things that we need, among many others, is a massive dose of compassionate and loving group therapy, which we get through video conferencing, through Zoom, for example. And there's lots more to say about that. And again, I recommend the 30-minute and the 45-minute videos below. Let's see. You know, I showed on the slides the grid about hunger and geography and these topics and all that. Well, same thing applies to climate, to the biosphere, to the melting of ice, the refreezing of ice. There's this whole grid of specific topics and intersections between topics, all of which need to be mastered. And, you know, that's one of the good things about having 8 billion people on the planet, is there's a lot of expertise and a lot of, you know, exotic combinations of expertise and whatnot. And as we talk about in the 30-minute video, one of the things we need to get good at is figuring out the right combinations of expertise or experience or what, or background or whatnot, in order to be successful in coming up with solutions very quickly, or components of solutions. Let's see. And what I really want to emphasize, and this is going to then bring it back full circle to the whole big picture, you know, full stack, as I call it, and I'll share slides for that as well. Actually, I think I've got slides. Let me check. Okay, yeah, we've got some good slides for this. So screen sharing here. So with an initial intense focus on ensuring that we feed everyone, community cafes on wheels, the Hungerless Games. Now, we quickly pivot from there to solar radiation management for the simple reason that our goal is not just to feed everyone for 1 meal or 10 meals or 6 months, or no, ongoingly. I mean, like for the rest of time. And so we need to have a world that supports the growth of plants. And to have that, we need to have a planet that does not continue on the omnicidal exponential overheating trajectory. We need to stop that, and the only way to do it in time is with SRM, planetary scale, as I keep mentioning. So there's this initial dual focus on feeding everyone and collective superintelligence. The collective superintelligence that we evolve in the process of feeding everyone will give us the potential to do the SRM so that we can actually have a livable planet. But in summary, this initial dual focus ultimately addresses, and very quickly, our need for food, our need to unite as a species, especially in the face of extinction, potential extinction. If you ask Guy McPherson, near certain extinction. Our need to be free from crippling, deadly pandemics, our need to live on a livable planet, right? So what I'm proposing is that in the process of taking this detour, which really enables collective intelligence to rapidly mature into collective superintelligence, at that point, which we're still very far from, but we can cover a lot of ground very quickly if we just hop to it and do it. Again, please join radish.org so that you can have just full access to everything you need. The collective superintelligence will come up with the complete strategy and plan, right, to get us to a whole world. So right now, that's just, you know, I mean, we can speculate all we want, but the reality is, until we have collective superintelligence, feeding everyone, cooling the planet, right, and continuing to evolve and grow, because really there's no limit to collective superintelligence if you consider all the facets that we talk about in the 30-minute video. So really we're just focused on, the first part of the pathway, the first, few major milestones, right? Getting enough people into this conversation, this full stack conversation, including this possible, detour, this other possible detour. Hey, maybe we do several detours in parallel, whatever. Right. Anyway, so with that, let me pause for a second. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I'm complete. Please make sure you watch the videos below, and look forward to seeing you on either the Collective Intelligence Block Party or the Solution Club. Full details on radish.org. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.